Okay, folks. So we started out with a funny story. This one is a not so funny story. This is a pretty serious one. President Trump will sign an executive order instructing the Department of Defense and DHS to send illegal migrants to Guantanamo Bay. That's right, to Guantanamo Bay. You heard that right. Now, what I'm betting most of you don't know is that Guantanamo Bay doesn't mean the terrorist prison. There actually is an existing separate migrant facility that's used very rarely on Guantanamo Bay. And it's built there for the same reason, to avoid the inconveniences of U.S. law when dealing with people. So here he is.
So signing an executive order to instruct the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security to begin preparing the 30,000-person migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay. Most people don't even know about it. We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. Some of them are so bad we don't even trust the countries to hold them because we don't want them coming back, so we're going to send them out to Guantanamo. This will double our capacity immediately, right? And tough. That's a tough place to get out of.
Yeah,
Today's
tough place to get out
us
of.
one step closer to eradicating the scourge of migrant crime in our communities once and for all. And it was just it's just an unforced error that we even have to be doing this. Now we need Congress to provide full funding for the complete and total restoration of our sovereign borders, as well as financial support to remove record numbers of illegal aliens.
Okay, so what he's saying there is that they are going to voluntarily send migrants to this Guantanamo Bay facility, which is going to need an infrastructure overhaul because there's no way it can hold 30,000 people as of now. But he's not simply saying, and look, you never know what Trump means because he runs his mouth, right? I mean, he plays very fast and loose with what he actually means. Is he suggesting that we send them there if their home governments won't take them back? Maybe, but that's not what he said there. For to take his words at face value, what he's saying is we're going to put people there who we don't trust their governments to handle so they don't come back. That's what he's saying. So you're saying we're gonna send people there if we don't trust that they won't escape and come back across the border when we send them to their home country. So
the commandant will be Governor Ron Enshore DeSantis.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I should have him go there.
Feeding will be done rectally.
That's right.
He has
Ron
experience
DeSantis
with that.
has experience with that. Yeah, absolutely. Trump orders preparation of Guantanamo Bay facility to house migrants. President Trump said he is signing an executive order on Wednesday to prepare a massive facility at Guantanamo Bay to be used to house deported migrants. The order will direct the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security to prepare a 30,000-person migrant facility, at Guantanamo Bay, a facility in Cuba that has been used to house military prisoners, including several involved in the 9/11 attacks. The order is the latest step in a government-wide effort enacted by the Trump administration to remove certain immigrants from the United States. Guantanamo Bay is best known as a military base where terror suspects are held. It became infamous for accusations of torture and abuse as the U.S. carried out the war on terrorism. The Biden administration sought to wind down operations at the facility, just like Obama did, and never did it. This is now 12 years worth of Democratic presidents who promised they were going to do this and haven't done it. There are 15 detainees still there. The New York Times last September reported that the base also housed a separate facility to house migrants. Since taking office on January 20th, Trump has signed a slew of executive orders specifically intended to crack down on immigration. His administration has also ramped up deportations, with ICE posting regular updates about how many arrests it carries out on a day-to-day basis. But the rapid deportations have in some cases led to issues about where to send individuals being removed for the U.S., particularly if certain countries refuse to accept migrants. The Trump White House on Sunday sparred with the president of Colombia after he initially refused to accept planes of deported immigrants. Colombia later relented after Trump threatened to impose tariffs and sanctions. So the report in the New York Times that they're referencing is here. And we're going to touch on this very briefly today, and then I would like to do a deeper dive on this at some point in the near future, because I actually read the entire report. It's not that long. It's about 30 pages that this article was based on by an organization called the International Refugee Assistance Project, because this facility at Guantanamo is largely unknown. Most people I didn't even know that this existed. When people hear they're going to send migrants to Guantanamo Bay, you think, well, they're going to be, put in the same place that we know, suspects are being held there without trial or anything. But apparently there is a separate facility just for migrants, intercepted at sea, mostly from Cuba and Haiti. So inside the secretive facility housing migrants at Guantanamo Bay, reports and interviews shed new light on the holding center, where migrants' calls with lawyers are monitors, and some say they've been forced to wear blackout goggles. So the treatment of these migrants is not much better than the treatments of the terror suspects in the other Guantanamo Bay facility, from what we can read. For decades, migrants intercepted at sea as they try to reach the United States have been sent to a facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, a place better known for the U.S. prison camp for terror suspects. Although migrants are kept in a separate space, they exist in a form of legal limbo, confined to a military base that operates outside of standard American immigration laws. The situation has always been opaque, with little public information about what happens there. Now, internal government reports obtained by the New York Times, along with interviews with migrants and advocacy groups, have shed more light on the conditions on Guantanamo, including allegations that migrants have been forced to wear blackout goggles during transport through the base, that their calls with lawyers are monitored, and that some areas are unfit for habitation, with rats and overflowing toilets. I left Cuba hoping to find freedom, said Alberto Corzo, who fled his country with his wife, 3 sons, and a handful of others who managed to squeeze onto the small wooden boat that he spent a month building as he planned his escape. After the Coast Guard stopped them and delivered them to Guantanamo, Mr. Corzo said he and his family saw their dreams of America dwindle. We felt like prisoners of the United States, he said, with certain privileges. That story is part of this report. Like I said, I do want to do a fuller segment on this report because it's pretty harrowing stuff. It's really just one of the sort of darker corners of American policy that has been largely unexamined. The man in the article there in the New York Times, that was sourced from this report. So it was Alberto Corzo and Martha Sanchez. They were 2 journalists. So that guy was not just a guy who fled Cuba because he claimed, persecution and was looking to get refugee status here in the U.S. He was actually a journalist who was dissenting against the Cuban government, and he had actually made trips to the United States and back to Cuba as part of his journalism. And then what happened was in 2022, Cuba passed a law that would land the 2 of them in serious legal trouble, like a decade plus in jail. And so once they passed that law, he figured, well, we have to leave. And so he put his family on a boat and they left. And when the Coast Guard intercepted them, they assumed that that was actually a good thing. Because they assumed, given their relationship with the United States government, that they'd be allowed in. I mean, they were doing what most of us watching this show would probably agree is American anti-Cuban propaganda to a certain extent, right? But no, the Coast Guard sent them to Guantanamo, where there's no education for the kids, and you could be held for years here. You could be held for years at a place like this until either a third-party country agrees to accept you, or you agree to go back home and face the consequences of having left in the first place, which, again, this facility was set up for Cuban and Haitian migrants. So once you leave Cuba, you're not really allowed to go back on good terms. So that's why this place exists. Now, this place is not designed to hold 30,000 people. And so what Donald Trump is talking about doing is essentially building a giant migrant facility on Guantanamo Bay, a place that we specifically use to avoid the norms and due processes of American law, for up to 30,000 people. And they could be there forever. Because according to Donald Trump, if we were to take what he's saying at face value, we're not even going to check with their home countries to see if they want them back. So at that point, who's going to take them back? What do you, I mean, there's not going to be a bidding war by third-party countries to take criminal migrants back. So what, you just going to throw them in there forever? No trial, no jury, no appeal, no nothing? You're just going to throw 30,000 bodies into a prison offshore that's not subject to American law? That seems to be the plan. That's pretty scary stuff, I'd say.
Well, as you say, Trump says a lot of shit.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, because when you look at the funding and logistics involved in this, there's a very long way from Trump getting in front of a mic and saying, yeah, we're going to put 30,000 people at a place built to take 1,000 at best.
Well, apparently he signed an order, so it's
and
a little more
actually,
formalized than that. Yeah.
Yes, but you have, he says he's requesting the funding.
Right.
You got to get the funding. You got to get the logistics. You got to get it built. Politically, there's no downside, because if you look at the celebration of the dystopian images of Dr. Phil cruising neighborhoods looking for illegal immigrants, there's no price to pay. There's really, at this time, there's no political price to pay. This is one of those situations, and it's very dangerous when you start to get this kind of momentum. When you get the momentum of the public, of the group psychology going in the direction of kicking others, of abusing others, of cruelty being something to celebrate, that can escalate out of control very quickly. And I think that's part of what you're seeing here. If you look at the conversation, it's like this wellspring of just ill will and bitterness and resentment, as is intended, is being heaped on these migrants and immigrants, most of whom, at the end of the day, we let in for the cheap labor. Right. I have said this throughout this crisis, if you want to call it that, and it certainly is in some places. There is absolutely no way that a country with our resources could not control its border. So, and Trump came in and he's proving it, right? Where are all the migrants coming in now? They could have sent the troops down to the border. They could have called it an emergency. They wanted the cheap labor. So, in a certain sense, you have to say, well, you can't really blame these people as if they really had to evade the authorities and go around them. I mean, to a certain extent. But in the end, we wanted them here. There's no way millions of people could have gotten in if that was not the case.
No, crossing the border was like going 65 into 55. Yeah, technically you're over, but you're never going to get pulled over for doing that. That's essentially that was essentially our attitude toward the U.S. border, toward the southern border. Yeah.
Right, because it provided cheap labor. Unlike a lot of Western countries, we don't provide a lot to our citizens. Education, healthcare. It's profitable to let people come in and pay taxes and not give them shit, and put pressure on the labor force, make it difficult to organize unions, make it difficult to demand better pay. That's not their fault, but I do believe that's a big part of why this was allowed to happen in the first place. Now, because this was not dealt with in a reasonable way, people are celebrating seeing it dealt with, period. And it's very easy when people psychologically get into that space to start to become cruel.
Fascist.
Cruel.
That's when they become fascist, in a word.
That's how fascism happens, really, in a nutshell. Like, you're seeing that crowd psychology of like, yeah, you know what? And for demagogues, the easiest thing to do in that situation, and very often the most politically advantageous thing to do, is to keep feeding that. Through escalation. Get more cruel, get more cruel, get more cruel, right? Where's the limit? Once the public momentum goes in that direction, it's very dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. And, the other part of this too, I mean, like I said, not to belabor the point too much, Trump mentioned just sending people here in anticipation of them escaping from their home country. But there's also, if they do get the funding and actually build this, which, indications are now that is their goal, There's, like you said, there's so much political momentum behind this. I don't think it's unlikely they will. We'll see what happens, obviously. We will absolutely follow up on this one way or another, because I want to do a deep dive into what this facility actually is, because I read the report and it's pretty harrowing stuff. But anyway, what this facility would give the Trump administration is a backup in case they run into diplomatic snafus with some of these other countries. Like Petro said, he didn't want the Colombian migrants back. At that point, Trump had to try and strong arm him into taking them back, which he was able to do. But what if you run into a situation where a government's not going to take them back? Well, now we have a backup. Now we can park them here and leave them there pretty much forever, because it's not really reasonable to think that some third-party country is just going to swoop in and take these people in. So if we don't want them, their home countries don't want them, we park them here. They'll stay there forever. No trial, no. That's why Guantanamo exists. It exists to treat people as if we are not a country with a constitution. And that's the whole point of it, right? And so we will see. We will see. But see how quickly the momentum builds. I mean, that's part of what you were talking about there. When you gin up a mob against a group, it goes from 0 to 100 pretty damn quick.
Right. And the whole country is being turned into an angry mob.
Yes.
And yes, I mean, our show up until this point, now power has changed. Our focus is going to be different. Who's holding the reins of power? But we have focused quite a bit on the failings of the liberal class that led to this.
Right.
Our reason for that critique was always, do you see this iceberg? Do you see this? Go. And now we hit the iceberg.
Exactly. That's what 2024 was. That's part of what my article was about. It's the implosion of liberalism as a project, as foreshadowed in 2016. Not just with the election of Trump, but with the surge in popularity for the Bernie Sanders campaign. Because what that was a signal, that was a canary in the coal mine, in the sense that it signaled that Obama, Clinton era politics was dying. And that if you did not carry the ball forward in a more progressive direction, we were going to go backwards. And here we are. It was always my response to people when they would criticize the show 2022, 2023. Why don't you attack Republicans? Why don't you attack Republicans? Well, because they're not in power. I mean, it's basically that simple. It's basically that simple. When they're in power, we'll cover it. We have kept that promise. You can't say we haven't. Right. But yes, the reason we were making those arguments for all those years is because of precisely this. And not just this, but in terms of labor. We're going to do a story a little bit later about Trump deballing the NLRB, right? Firing the equal opportunity employment hires there. That is the reason why he has license to do that, partly because of Elon and Bezos, but also that's part of a DEI backlash, right? Like if you do not build momentum, you are inviting backlash. Politics is a game of momentum. It's a game of forward movement. You cannot just sit on the ball and run the clock out. That's what the Democrats and the liberal class has sought to do since since the fall of the Soviet Union, but especially since the election of Obama. We've elected a brilliant, eloquent avatar of multiculturalism and success. That's it. The system that brought us here is good because it brought us here to the election of Barack Obama. They have not made a substantial commitment to working people. They haven't even promised anything really substantial for working people since then.
Well,
and that's what brings you here.
Well, and you could see it in this election. They got so high in their own farts that the only message that they could think of was literally to shame people. Both the Obamas. Michelle went and gave that speech, not promising anything. Just tisk on you if you don't vote for Kamala. Same thing with Obama. Oh, well, the brothers.
Yeah.
You guys need to pull those pants up.
Right.
You need to get in line and vote for Harris. Because that's it. If you have a progressive project whose owners, Wall Street, inherently will not allow you to make meaningful progress, what else can you talk about other than that? It's all identity politics. Fascism always comes in on the collapse of liberal authority.
Exactly.
And the things that they're saying that, frankly, a lot of people in our space, I'm not going to call out by name right now. I'm sure eventually it's probably going to come to that the way things are going. We'll see what happens over the next few months. But you got a lot of people who should know better who are jumping on the bandwagon, man. You know, that happened with a lot of people under fascism. You had a lot of the artists, a lot of the journalists, a lot of the people who should have known better jumped on board because it's easy. It's easy when these guys go and say, yeah, we're going to clean up this corruption. The corruption is real. And if you're political, you've probably been frustrated by it. So the idea of people coming in and smashing your enemies, the liberal class, it's very tempting to just get swept up in that mood and to be on the side that's winning, frankly, when the momentum is going in that direction. But if you scratch the surface a little bit, as you say, the NLRB, Guantanamo. Yeah, okay. So yes, I pointed out, we covered that Dr. Phil thing. And I said, hey, man, why is this fan of the playground walking around? It's a legitimate question. You open the door to put these people in power by making decisions like that.
Right.
How do you think this plays to people? They are saying, what the hell? Why was a guy like that walking around the street? That is what you're supposed to look at and not say, well, who's going to be on Guantanamo? Who are these people going to be?
Right.
Are we recreating the Japanese internment camps of World War II? Because that's what it sounds like it's going to be to me.
That's what it sounds like, yeah. I mean, you could point to people who did truly loathsome things and say, well, why should we care what happens to them, right? That's an emotional response that a lot of people have. But what you are creating by opening up Guantanamo Bay to migrants is an extra legal facility to come up with a simple solution for inconvenient cases. So what if there are migrants you can't relocate and you don't want them here? Well, if we got 30,000 beds, we'll stick them there, right? Well, you're telling me everyone on that island is going to be a public safety threat? And if they are, you also have to recall that the example that one of many in this IRAP document was a family that thought they would be accepted into the United States. They get parked there. Now what are you going to do?
Exactly.
You're going to put a bunch of child sex offenders in there with them, right? Doesn't that endanger the people who are there, right? Who are seeking refugee status? And the only difference between those families and families that are here is that they're intercepted at sea. The Supreme Court said in 1993 that you could impose a different standard on migrants apprehended at sea who don't reach U.S. soil. So you got Coast Guard ships running around the Gulf of America, as we now call it, intercepting migrants who can park them there. If they don't reach U.S. soil, we have no obligation to put them through the kind of due process. There's a whole different sort of informal classification system for migrants apprehended at sea and put in Guantanamo than there are migrants who make it to U.S. soil. Again, we'll get more into detail on that in a future show because I want to do a more full segment on this. But yeah, this is not the direction you want to be heading in. It's not the direction you want to be heading in. And one final thing, you know, what Russ said is absolutely true. Fascism always follows from a liberal collapse. FDR talked about this in his very famous Four Freedoms speech. You know, fascism does not emerge because people make a conscious choice that they want to be ruled by fascists. It's when they lose investment in democracy where they figure, well, if democracy is not doing much for me, maybe we can trade it in and get something for it. Right? That's how you get there. That's how you get there. And you're well on your way. You're well on your way. That's not an exaggeration. That's not Trump derangement syndrome. That's just seeing the world for what it is.
Listen, man. When I see people who've been talking about Zionism, been talking about the Palestinian cause for over a year, celebrating Tulsi Gabbard, celebrating Crazy Eyes Patel over there, makes me sick, man. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. Why didn't you just shut up for the last year and a half then, if that's what you're going to do now? I get it. It's the side that's winning. Ooh, they're going to put a podcaster in the press room. Ooh, well, you know what? I guess that makes it okay. You know, yeah, you can't make an omelet without breaking some Palestinians, right?
Yep.
What are you going to do?
I agree.
Tim Pool's going to be in the press room, so you know, it's all good.
They'll have to turn up the heat in there, sweat them out. under that beanie. Get him to leave.
Please clap.